Now we have a very special panel session that's going to be discussing one of the hottest topics in the automotive industry, bringing back professional football to San Francisco. No, that's not it. Digital retailing. The moderator for this session is Chris Sutton, the Vice President of Automotive Retail for J.D. Power. Chris is responsible for the company's U.S. syndicated retail studies, including the Sales Satisfaction Index Study and the Customer Service Index Study. Chris, if you can please come up on stage, and I'll let you introduce your panelists.
Thank you, Gino. Very happy to be here today. I think we've got a really outstanding panel, and the reason why I say that is it's a really great blend between dealer and strategic partners. So we look forward to the feedback and the perspective that each of them brings, and I would also encourage you to ask questions. We certainly have a list of what we think are impactful questions, but I know the group will come up with some equally strong ones. But with that, with no further ado, let me introduce our panelists. First, I'd like to introduce the Vice President of Business Development from Roadster, Amit Chandarana. Amit, welcome.
Thank you.
Also on the partner side, but also a third-generation dealer, founder of Dealer Science, Vice President of Digital Retail for TrueCar, Andrew Gordon. Andrew, welcome. And then representing the dealers, again, great cross-section here. From New Orleans, Louisiana, a town that has been maybe unfairly punished by horrible NFL officiating over the last week, but we otherwise welcome Charles Dubord from the Ray Brandt Auto Group. He's the Sales Operations Manager. Welcome, Charles. And then lastly, Marketing Director from Johnson Automotive with stores in North Carolina, Maryland, and Florida, Eric Kirks. Eric, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. So I've always wanted to be on these panels, and I thought it would be fantastic to be kind of comfortably seated in the area where you guys are. And today I found out that I wasn't going to be seated that way. I was standing over here off to myself. So, but otherwise that's okay. As a J.D. Power panel, right? We certainly feed and live on data. So we're going to start the panel with some data points from our 2018 J.D. Power New Autoshopper Study. And I'm going to ask the group to react to those. So as we kick off the panel, I'd like to ask that we kind of transition the slide. And I'm going to read off these data points. Again, these are from our new Autoshopper, which is based on shoppers that most recently purchased a vehicle. And we asked them for their feedback in a number of areas. And the two that I think are relevant here is the first is 41% of customers indicate that they either definitely would or probably would, right? So these kind of top two boxes. Would be willing to negotiate the entire transaction online without ever visiting the dealership, right? So essentially the promise of digital retail, 41% of the customers indicate that they'd be willing to do that today. And when we looked at the demographic mix of that, as you would expect, the younger customers skewed much higher than 50%. At the same time, right, the same group of folks that we talked to, only 17% of those same customers indicated that they'd be willing to submit personal financial information prior to visiting the dealership, right? So a huge dichotomy there between the customers said they'd indicate that they'd love to complete the transaction online, but at the same time, a lot of hesitancy around personal financial information. So to kick us off today, I'm going to start with Eric and Charlie as from a retail perspective and get your thoughts on, talk to us about how you're seeing these stats played out in your store, right? Do you see that customers willing and prefer to negotiate online, and talk to us about customers, the willingness of your customers in your market to submit personal financial information. Eric, if we could start with you.
Yeah, so we're definitely seeing a segment of our shoppers that want to engage with us this way, and it's some of the challenge that we have as an industry right now is providing so many different ways and methods and omni-channel approach for these customers to engage with us. I think the challenge with that industry-wide is how we price vehicles online. We've got stores that price very aggressively in terms of new car inventory, and we have other brands that we choose to start at MSRP. And so that makes it very difficult for a customer to trust the pricing that they're seeing as being a fair deal or a market price deal. And so, so we find personally in our stores, the ones that are more aggressive, that are showing kind of more of a market value pricing approach, they get a little bit more engagement on this type of channel. However, you know, we don't have as many issues with customers not wanting to submit their credit information online. We're in, like, one of our stores is in the Raleigh market, which is like one of the top 5 tech economies right now. And so we find a lot of the younger customers or our previous customers that know that they can trust doing business with us, they have no problem at all. That said, a lot of those are also having an opportunity to engage with us in some sort of communication outside of a straight digital transaction. So that could be a chat, a text, or a quick phone call. But that's kind of where we're at right now.
Okay. Charlie, what about you?
Yeah, I would think that when I look at the statistics, I see people that want to be in control. They want transparency, and more than anything, I think they value their time. But you know, it's only 17% wanting to submit credit applications. I think they still want to go to the dealership, drive their car, have the experience as a whole. So if anything, it's a solution to probably 3 pain points for customers. They want to be in control, they want transparency, they want their time, and we want to ultimately sell profitability and value. So for us, it should increase time on site. If you have a higher time on site average, then ultimately that's more opportunity to sell value, person, place, product, price, maybe F&I products. Start to build value in those as well. And theoretically, when people convert to the dealership world, it should be seamless. So whoever helped them with whatever it was they were doing online it should be seamless. They should know the whole story. Okay. So
great, thank you. So Amit, from your standpoint, right, you just saw and heard the stats. Anything from a technology standpoint, things that you think could make it customers more comfortable submitting the financial information online? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think our perspective is a lot of it's not under our control, right? I mean, we always talk to dealers. Dealers say, well, customers are not willing to submit information online, so it's not truly omni-channel commerce, or it's not digital retailing. The reality is it's not under our control, right? If Equifax has a breach tomorrow, then you're going to see that number go to 5. If somebody else has a personal experience outside the automotive industry, and remember, we do this every 3, 4, 5 years, that's going to continue to drop. So I think the thing is we've got to sell the value propositions of you can get to steps 1 through 4 or 5 and not submit your credit application, but take care of everything else. But when you do come in, we're going to pick up exactly where you left off. To your point, if we don't pick you up and understand where you were along the process and then take you from there to complete the process, we're going to break the promise, and the next time they talk about it with their friends or family or they go to buy a vehicle, they're certainly not going to help that. I mean, we always use this term, it's only creepy if it doesn't work, so as long as it works, you're okay.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So Andrew, I think you bring a unique perspective here, right? Not only from the standpoint of third-generation dealer, but also partner side as well. So if you could talk from your perspective about what do you think some of the common mistakes maybe dealers make in adapting digital retail tools, and what kind of guidance and recommendations would you give to them from that standpoint?
Yeah, so I think with Eric and Charles, I couldn't agree more. When you guys talked about just consistency between the website and what's happening in the showroom, I think that's where a lot of stores have a lot of trouble and a lot of difficulty, and operationally that's why it's so difficult. I mean, that's where we were born out of at Dealer Science and such. We just to jump back, Eric, you said something about dealers and how people need to have like a separate conversation. There's an experience online, but if someone hasn't had a conversation with you, they might not get that it's going to be the same, or they might not understand the trust and transparency in the transaction. I think that's the core of this, is that people understand that they need to actually engage with the store, because that's the easiest way to convey trust. We're not actually doing that online. We're not actually doing that in a website experience the same way we do inside the showroom. So I think that part of the problem is that we're not actually engaging customers the way that we should. with digital retail. We're not doing it like we do inside the stores, and I think that's why there's such a disparity of trust and disparity of people that are actually taking a digital retail approach versus the people that are actually say that they're willing to or willing to start going down that path.
Okay, great, thank you. So a comment was made around Omni-Channel experience, right? So Amit, I'd ask you to kind of start, and from your perspective, why is that Omni-Channel experience important, right? Why is it, you know, you hear a lot of terminology around that. Talk to us about the importance of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mean to be as respectful as possible on this, I think we completely overthink it, right? There's not many things in the world that we don't either look up online, make a phone call to, or gather information about, and then maybe go into brick and mortar and try to transact. And if you don't go into brick and mortar, and even if you do it on Amazon, it's probably not the first time you've seen that product is online. You've probably seen it at friends or family, or you've seen it at another store, and then you realize that it's easier to go pick it up online. So, you know, the term omni-channel is just old school business. It's I see it and then I go purchase it, whether or not I do it through mail order or the phone or television or now the internet, right? We built our business from the ground up to be that way because ultimately we don't believe that it is completely about a person starting online and buying a large product like this, which might be the biggest purchase price, you know, product that they do in their lifetime, completely sight unseen. They still want to go touch and feel. But if you don't pick up the process where they left off and you don't give them that value, then it doesn't save them the most important thing that we're all trying to accomplish, which is probably time at the end of the day, right? We can't get any more of it. Everyone has the same amount. So money is one thing, but time is the most important thing, and I think omni-channel really serves that purpose.
Okay, great, thank you. So at the start, we invited questions from the audience, right? And we're happy to have a first one come in, and I'm going to pose this to the group. It's a great question. What impact, if any, do OEM restrictions on advertised price, i.e. map pricing, have on helping or hindering your ability to deliver the experience customers want through digital retailing? And Charlie, Eric,
I don't think it would have any because most of the OEMs allow one-to-one marketing. So as soon as you have their information, you can put whatever price you want.
Eric, what about you for the stores under your portfolio?
I mean, you know, again, I go back to the challenge being pricing. And for digital retailing, you know, the reason that some of the disruptors have come in and been able to kind of affect us a little bit is because we're not one price. We're not fully transparent. And if we could go to one price in some capacity that will allow us to hold a fair amount of margin, allow the customer to perceive that they're getting a fair deal on the transaction, that would create a more level playing field. And I know this is something that the industry's talked about forever, but there's no question that the industry is moving towards a more digital focused retailing model. Our pricing needs to catch up to it. Our desking managers, our sales managers' mentality needs to catch up to it. We can't take, like Amit said to his point, we can't take a customer that's on step 4 of a digital retailing process, hand them off to a person on the sales floor that's been there for 13 years and knows the Foursquare up and down. You're dead in the water when you do that. And so, you know, again, we've still got to handle the customer that wants to come in and fight the battle and go through 4 pencils, because some do. They feel like they're not getting the best deal unless they fight for it. But we've also got to have the ability to adapt to this new model and provide that seamless approach from online to offline.
So, you know, this has become more prevalent. You know, one of my hypotheses has been that, you know, relative to an OEM, that a dealer group is probably better poised to implement digital retailing because they don't have because less maybe restrictions, less MSRP pricing guidelines, and that a dealer group is probably better positioned to implement digital retailing versus say the OEM. In kind of accordance with that, one of the follow-up questions we got from the audience on this is then, how do you create online pricing transparency and have those prices match what is found in a store when a manufacturer has strict pricing guidelines as part of their marketing covenant? So Andrew, I'm assuming you see this, and if you could comment on that with map type pricing and the marketing covenants.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. So I think that it's a really great question, and it's something that everyone sees as a challenge. But that's just it. It's just a challenge, and I think it's all about the strategy. I mean, you guys both mentioned your strategy and approach. to how you overcome it and how you work with it. And a lot of it's making sure that your messaging is consistent with the consumer. So it's making sure that if it's not actually your transactional price, don't give that price, or give an engagement point that asks them to engage with you to get that price. If you're giving a price that's not actually your upfront price, then that can break that trust and transparency before you've actually built it. So in that same way, creating that consistent experience so that once someone actually creates that one-to-one connection, your payments are consistent throughout the process. So your BDC is empowered to be able to send out that price without having to go desk every single deal. They have a place to go to. They have a tool set to help them get there. They have a set of rules to work within. The salespeople, the sales staff, the desk managers, having them work from a consistent place once you actually get that one-to-one connection or create that consistent strategy. I think that's how you work with it to make sure that you're still building on that trust and establishing it throughout the whole process.
Great, thank you. I would tell you from my standpoint, as a customer, right, a couple years ago, when we first started seeing some digital retail solutions, as a customer, I went on to a site of a dealer site, and I found the explanation of how it worked fantastic, right? As a customer, I had a very clear sense of how this would look, and as a customer, I thought, wow, this is pretty neat. I think I'd like to do business this way. I go online, and literally the first thing I see before I even was able to pick out a vehicle was kind of the same old request for information on name, email, phone, contact information, and I just thought, we're right back in kind of the same soup again. This isn't that much different. I wonder if the group could comment on it. Does it have to be that way, and what are your recommendations around getting around that? I understand that certainly we need customer information at some point, but I thought in this case, I was requesting information before I even picked out a vehicle, which to me, I was on to the next deal. So maybe Amit, if you could talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, from experience, I understand both sides of the fence. I can understand where the OEM wants to protect the brand integrity. I mean, we're in a competitive space, and there are sometimes actors in the space that won't necessarily play properly, right? So as an OEM, I can understand the protection of the brand, because that rising tide does lift boats, right? The other side of this, on the retail technology side of this now, I think it's how you communicate it, right? We're in a world where if you give, then you get, then it's okay. So again, I only speak from our examples in the sense of, if you're telling someone that, hey, I simply need to just grab your name so I can give you this information because it makes it easier for us to provide this to you, but you have to be very communicative. I mean, specifically, we tell individuals that you are instantly going to see this information, because to your example, so many people are now burned by the get e-price button or request more info button, which to me doesn't make a lot of sense in our industry anymore, because the customer has to answer a question for something you're already telling them you have. And then second of all, most of the time at 10 o'clock at night when I put my kids to bed and I click on that button, you actually don't give me the information that I requested. So if you put something up there that says, hey, give us your cell phone number and we'll text you the price right away, I'm more inclined to do that because I'm getting what I wanted to get from you. So I think communicating it, being specific, and then delivering on what you said you're going to deliver will move this along.
Charlie, from your perspective, right, you have competition in town. What's your perspective on this? Right?
I think that, well, I think you have to consider the manufacturer first, because some that do have MAP policies, you'd want to have that model. For the other ones, I would think I'm more in line with what you're saying. The more information you give, the more you'll get in return. And I think ultimately, if you think about leadership, it really boils down to influence. And influence comes from credibility, which comes from competence. When you have a website that has pictures that everybody was kind of alluding to, and comments and descriptions, and you have all the prices and payments all available, then you seem very competent, which allows you to influence people through the time that they're on the site in excess of what they would have been otherwise, and sell the 4 Ps, go back to an old school car close, person, place, product, price. Why should they do business with you? And I think a lot of times if you were to sit in a room and ask that question, you'll stare at each other for a while before somebody says, well, do we have loaner cars or coffee? And that's typically where it starts, and you work your way out from there. But do you have a unique selling proposition? Give them the information. I mean, they're going to get it anyway. If they don't get it from you, they'll get it from me. and I'll try to sell why they should do it with us in the meantime.
So we have some really good questions from the audience coming in, and I'll try and address these as I can. Charlie, staying with you, and then Eric, I want your perspective on this too. As a dealer, what concerns you the most about the prospect of digital retailing, and where are you in the implementation process, right? So really two-part question. Biggest concern, and where are we in terms of implementation? And I'll ask both of you this.
I'll start with the second half. We've got it live on 4 of our stores right now. The other stores we're still working towards. We've got a lot of concerns in the stores that don't have it about profitability and quoting prices at by rate. Are you going to mark the rate up, et cetera? So we're fighting some of that battle. You know, in terms of concerns, I don't really have any concerns. I think it's a great tool. I think, if anything, we're gonna start selling F&I products, or the value of, you know, maybe a video of somebody dropping their key in a drain, for example, and then, you know, for $4 a month, you know, you can get key protection or whatever products you have. And you start to kind of, if anything, use the time to pre-influence them so it is more profitable when they get to the store. So.
Great.
Yeah, very similar here too. We're actually building those same videos right now too. But we did fight a little bit of a battle with F&I. We've got a pretty solid F&I process in the box, but they are scared to be too transparent about sharing that information because they think people will disqualify themselves without getting the full in-person pitch. I think it's just the opposite, and I think most of the data out there is proving that's the opposite. People that have more information ahead of time, ahead of going into the finance office, they're purchasing more product. We are also finding it easier to implement in our mass brand stores, our Hondas, our Hyundais, Subaru. Some of the high-end luxury that we have, it doesn't really make sense because the volume is still so low with our digital retailing conversions that it doesn't even make sense to try to implement that with a Porsche or Maserati or something like that. And Lexus is sort of in the middle right now because those are my stores that advertise at MSRP. We are, in full transparency, we're not selling them at MSRP once you get there. But the perception there, you know, what we're doing is working well from a volume standpoint. But the perception there is if we become too aggressive on price, then that's the starting point, the fear that customers are still going to want to negotiate even through the digital process, and they're going to start at invoice or start at a lower price. So we're still overcoming some, you know, old school ingrained beliefs with some of our stores.
Yeah. So similar question, and I think it addresses what you had just talked about. So I've seen data, not JD Power data, that suggested that customers who had gone online and viewed F&I products were more likely to buy. Grosses associated with those were fairly strong. Amit, what about the stores under the Roadster portfolio? Any comments and thoughts about F&I pricing on the websites? I think Charlie and Eric have addressed that, but what about your perspective there?
I mean, the simplest example I can use of this is I work for a company called Roadster, and we literally use a Cox study to talk about F&I penetration. Because the nature of it is the data's the data, where if you show F&I earlier and often, the customer is more likely to purchase. And again, under the umbrella of overthinking, most of it in this room wouldn't go buy something that we haven't somewhat educated ourselves on, rather than the thing that we purchased right at the end. Think about your Apple experience or your Best Buy experience. They sprinkle these things in. So that's how we pitch it up front and make sure that customers, dealers of ours, are aware of it. When it comes to the statistics, we don't necessarily go out to market and say, you're going to increase your F&I penetrations. I think we're addressing the fear of most of the people in the room that my F&I penetrations are going to completely go away. And we've done 4 or 5 deep studies, and what we've seen is that the F&I penetrations are similar or exactly the same as what you see in store and when you do it through a digital retailing. So that's the true definition of incrementality, when somebody in their PJs is buying the product at the same penetration that your F&I managers are selling it at. And then we can start talking about cost of goods sold and et cetera.
Yeah. So following that, kind of taking that same thread, another audience question, assuming more and more of the purchase process moves online, how do you think dealers should change specifically as it relates to pricing, personnel, and staffing? And we'll kind of focus a little bit more on staffing than the other 3. So Andrew, maybe you comment first, and then Charlie, I want your perspective on that.
Yeah. So I think when it comes to so staffing, I think, we'll talk about staffing. I think that'll actually come in with this approach and this answer. I think that part of the solution that we're talking about with end-to-end digital retailing or buying online, in your stores, like what conversion do you normally see for like complete online transaction, customer never visits?
0.
0? Eric?
Low single-digit percentage.
We're talking about the high propensity of people to want these solutions. At the end of the day, if we're getting 0 and low single digits, to me it means that the solutions that we have that we're implementing, they're creating super leads, but they're not actually solving the problem that customers are looking for when they're saying, can I buy something online? If you look at like the Apples and Amazons that we were talking about, they're not producing leads. They're not listing inventory. You don't go to Apple's site, click iPhone, and see 3,500 iPhones that they have set up in their back warehouse, set up with 360-degree images, and it's much more informational. It's much more teaching people about these products, and it's learning from those digital retail experiences of the people that are winning in other verticals. So I think that's what's actually going to transform the space. When we're backing up a step and we're saying, what do we do in terms of staff? I think that one of the biggest steps that we can take today is operationally enabling people to be able to answer people's questions. People are reaching out because they shop online and they see SRP pages that are listed with trim names or engine types. And what they're missing is this car has a sunroof, leather, and alloy wheels. Like that information that tells you, here's why you'd pay more for this, here's why you'd buy this, that process that happens so easily inside a dealership. I think that's the value that the people need to add. I think that inside our store, I'm sure you probably have similar experiences. It was really hard to sell a car. My background is engineering, so when I got involved in our family's Honda dealership, it was so difficult for us. It took so much work for us to calculate a payment. It took so much work for us to make sure that the taxes were right and all these different operational pieces to make sure that my BDC agent was sending the same thing as my internet salesperson might do over the phone or my desk manager might give them. So I think the next step is actually creating unity between the channels, between what they see online, making sure that there are tools to empower everyone in the showroom, then everyone on the internet, everyone who answers the phone, to be able to calculate a payment without having to go to a sales desk every single time they need it, and free the sales managers up to do what they do best, which is manage and merchandise inventory and train their staff.
So Charlie, to that point, how do you see personnel and staffing migrating and changing?
So I should point out that we did 76 deals with Online Shopper.
Yeah.
So while we don't have people completing transactions online per se,
sure.
It is a phenomenal source of they feel in control, and when you actually do get in touch with them, they enjoy the experience, convert at a high rate. In the stores that we've had the most success with, we have high manager involvement. So we have the decision makers calling the customers as the first touch, to have that conversation about what they're looking to accomplish, et cetera, invite them in for an appointment. I think our worst model is the BDC model, where you have a giant disconnect with people of no authority talking to customers, and then they come in and there's a giant disconnect on the showroom floor with the salesperson or manager. I think staff-wise, as much as things tend to change, they tend to stay the same. I still think it boils down to good car guys. I did sell cars for 16 years. I think really good car guys doing a great job building value in the whys and being more professional than their competition and getting them in the door to drive the car, et cetera, et cetera. It's a fancy payment calculator, in my opinion, and it offers people a transparent feeling of control, and you can use that to your advantage.
As you're saying that's one of the great parts about it is you have a sales process built around a tool, which is it empowers people to be able to give some of those answers. It empowers people to be able to work through solutions at home and get some of this information that they're looking for. Yeah. But the crux of it that you just hit on was dealers add so much value in how they help someone through the process and help them land on the right car and help them with the sales process. You can't take them out unless you've really demonstrated, you've replaced them with something digital that does what they do online. And until you actually have that, I don't think you have digital retail. I think that you have the buy online button is kind of a fancy calculator, like you mentioned, that starts the conversation with your really experienced and awesome sales team.
Okay, so the last part of that question, right, talks about pricing, which we've talked about a bit, personnel and staffing, which you guys have addressed. What about facilities? So question for the group. Any opinions on how we see, as the advent of digital retail, facility requirements and facility needs migrate? Any opinions there?
I mean, you guys have dealers, not me.
I mean, we all know the costs associated with facilities, land, everything's getting bigger instead of smaller. It's tough. I feel like, I don't know what the time frame's going to be, but I feel like we will have the ability to operate out of leaner sales facilities and bigger service facilities. But that's not the model that the OEMs are allowing us to build off of right now. So we have to continue to build these giant showrooms and create this, experience. And like he said, I mean, I think we're in this phase right now where instead of finding tools to help our sales process, we're revamping our sales process to work around some of these new tools.
I think people just got to ask themselves a question. They walk into their dealerships every single day and they make sure everything looks clean and it's organized and it's well presented. Just ask yourself, if you went to your website, would you buy a car from yourself? Oftentimes we let that be off in the corner to an internet manager or a BDC, and it's just, I don't think it's fair to the majority of your traffic, quote unquote, to be let by the wayside and not have eyes on it all the time. And if you're not letting people conduct business the way they want to in their time, they'll just find another place to go do it.
You guys remember, those of us that have been around a long time, 96, 97, remember when internet leads started and they'd come through the fax machine in these stacks and they'd end up on someone's desk? Maybe you give them to the one guy on the floor that had an email address back then, and you didn't know if they were being worked or not. And so your conversion rate was really low and you had a pretty low opinion of internet leads. Look at it now, everybody's an internet customer now, whether they come through a lead or not. So, this is kind of where we are with that. We're in the early stages of this transactional, opportunity for people to have this different approach to buy from us. We don't want to stack these on someone's desk and ignore them. We've got to be figuring it out. So, kudos to everybody for being here and learning more about it.
So we've talked about pricing a bit. We've talked about F&I products online a bit. Another question from the audience around, what about sight unseen trade valuations, equity position, lack thereof? So Charlie, if you could talk about some of the challenges inherent there as part of digital retail.
We just recently had some issues with some trade values online that were a little bit high. I think that's going to happen. I feel like, again, you have to give people information, and ultimately when they come in, we're going to do a blind appraisal, we're going to walk around the car, we're going to devalue it, etc. We'll hit them with a Kelly Blue Book printout maybe and reduce it for recon. We'll try to use whatever information they have and justify the number from there. That way it's transparent. But at the end of the day, I think it's not going to present a huge challenge. It's just selling, like we have for the last 15 years when they bring in a printout of the same thing.
So Amit, question for you. When we look at the stores, again, under the portfolio of stores you work with, what are some of the best practices of stores that have had success? What would you communicate to the group here about some commonalities between some of the things those stores do pretty well?
Yeah, I think most of our best practices are actually learned in our failures. We learn a ton from what we fail on, and with our dealer partners, of course. But I think being here is the first step, right? Not putting your head in the sand, being aware, whether or not you want to do business with us or another partner or anybody else, understanding that this is happening. And to your point earlier, I don't think it's like internet leads, because internet leads was heavy. So this is going to happen much faster. So number one, you've got to just choose something and get in. You can't really say, I'm going to test this out and dip my toe in the water, because the reality is we're not really breaking the model here. We're just using realistic progression. This really isn't disruptive. This is where every other industry is going. We just got to keep up with it, right? Number two, We sell technology. 25% of the time after we sell our technology to a dealer, we spend 75% of the time working the process change. You got to have people that are open to change management. We all change as human beings every single day. Our businesses need to change, so having some people from the top down believe in this, tell the story. When we go into dealerships, we don't even use the name Roadster. I mean, it's really all about the dealership's technology, but we make sure that a dealer principal, general manager, or an executive is selling the value to everybody else as to why they're doing that. Once you sell the value to the people that you're paying and that you see every single day, they'll get on board and they'll understand the value that it's providing them to make them more efficient and save time. So you got to step into this thing wholeheartedly with eyes wide open. You got to continue to learn and most importantly, just understand how to process change management.
Great, thank you. Andrew, what about yourself? Comments around best practices of stores that you've seen, worked with, that have had good success. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that that dealers know how to sell cars, and they know how to sell them really well. I think when we work with stores, we try to make sure that their individuality shines, that we know what makes them tick, how they like to communicate with their customers. They know their market really well. They know what their prices can support. They know how to talk to trade and what trades are worth in their area. So what we're trying to do is make sure that we automate as much as we can of the manual busy work that they do, while knowing that 80% of them is going to be very similar to other dealerships. 10% will be a little bit different, and 10% will be like wildly different. That's just at this store. This is just how they do things. And like that's one of the things that as we talk about digital retail, we sometimes forget about, is that it's the people that are actually operating this. So can we take and make their lives easier? Can we make their processes and make it not quite so much work? I mean, that's what we did in our store. I think that in terms of like what works really well, the comments around paying attention to the customer journey when they land on the website, when they land on it and say, see something that says MSRP, discount, sale price, get e-price, buy online. And you know, it's even when it says explore payments and then there's a payment calculator and they're different places and they're different than the specials page. Like these things need to be tied together. We would never put up with it if we were buying a dishwasher. But somehow, because we're all in automotive, it seems normal, and if we weren't, outsiders looking in, they don't understand. That's why there's a disconnect. That's why there's so much difficulty with people adopting these technologies, because it's not normal to them. I think that it's those type things. It's those type things that'll actually transform it. It's those people that are doing this best are actually empowering people to follow through with their individual sales process without having to escalate every time they need a question answered. So.
Right, so I'm going to ask the panel to kind of play prognosticator here, right? So we'll kind of close where we began a little bit. You saw the stats at the beginning. And let's say 3 years from now, right, we have continuing growing percentage of younger customers entering the market, millennials. Is it fair to, and the group has mentioned here that the percent of customers that are actually transacting this way right now, extremely small. If we put out a prognostication, let's say 3 years from now, 15 to 20% of the customers will buy cars this way, and what would it take to get there? I'd ask each of you to respond to that as too low, too high, right, sounds about right, and what it would take to get there. So maybe if we start with Eric and just go around the horn and to close up.
I think that might be a little bit high.
Okay.
I think it's going to be a little bit slower adoption. You know, it's up to us to, and the industry as a whole, to kind of educate customers that this is an opportunity for them to buy a car in a different way. Until more of us are playing in that sandbox, people just aren't going to be aware of it. And until we get really better at it, the word of mouth about people that do go through that process is not going to spread very quickly. So, I mean, I think it's definitely, there's no question it's growing, but I think that might be a little bit before we hit the steep curve.
Okay, Charlie, what do you think?
I think you might see a hybrid version in the market where I think there's been a lot of margin compression, so you've seen a lot of turnover in sales. It's hard to keep people with minis unless you have kind of solved the pay plan issue already. So you might see less sales managers and more sales manager, salespeople, and they pick up the process by going to the customer's house. So with the car, for example, whatever point they are in the digital retailing process, they just then pick up there. Because I think at the end of the day, ultimately, the one thing that all customers probably value more than anything is time. So if we can figure out ways to value that time for them by sending high-quality individuals to pick up the process, so to speak. They still want to see the car, drive the car, et cetera. So, I mean, that's really the next evolution of the process, in my opinion.
Okay, so for the group, we're out of time, but Andrew, Amit, you think high, low, in between? Thumbs up, thumbs down?
I think it's about right.
Okay.
But I'm throwing a dart.
I think it's. I think we heard from 2 dealers that it was 0 or low 1% right now. I think you're going to see more and more of these elements become self-sufficient and become exact throughout the entire process to build that trust in the journey that'll enable it, just like other verticals do.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for participating, guys. Great work. And again, thanks to the audience for questions. You had some really insightful stuff, which we expected. Thanks very much.
Thanks, gentlemen.